She forged HOA documents, built a road through his private land, and fined him for standing in the way. But when he bought the street beneath her house, everything changed. Now she's in prison, and she pays him rent just to reach her own garage. This is how one man broke an entire HOA.
When I inherited my uncle's land just outside of Oak Springs, I thought I'd finally caught a break. It wasn't a fortune, but it was mine. A decent-sized plot, about 3 acres, with a few crumbling outbuildings, thick shrubs overtaking a cracked driveway, and the ghost of a vegetable garden. Real fixer-upper vibes. I had no illusions. It was going to take sweat, time, and more money than I was comfortable spending. But it was land. In this economy, that was gold. What I didn't expect, just a week after moving in with a rented trailer and my dog Hank, was a bulldozer rolling across my property like it owned the place. I was elbow-deep in a pile of rotting lumber behind the shed, trying to salvage anything usable when I heard the rumble. At first, I thought maybe a neighbor was getting a pool dug or something. Then I realized the sound wasn't passing by. It was coming closer, into my lot. I dropped the plank in my hands and jogged around the corner of the house, just in time to see a backhoe chewing into the scrubby brush near the southern edge of my land, tearing a neat trench straight through it. "What the hell?" I shouted, running toward the machine, waving my arms like an idiot. The operator didn't even flinch, just pointed toward the road and kept digging. A moment later, a white Lexus SUV pulled up, too clean for this much dust. Out stepped a woman in yoga pants, a tight bun, sunglasses the size of her ego, and that specific aura of menace that only HOA presidents seem to possess. "Excuse me," she called out as I approached, the kind of tone reserved for speaking to children and waiters. "Can I help you with something?" "You? Can you help me? This is my land, and I didn't authorize any construction on it. Turn that thing off." She raised a manicured hand. The operator finally shut the engine down. Silence fell. Just birds, wind, and my pulse hammering in my ears. "I'm Karen Reeves," she said, extending her hand like this was a business meeting. "President of the Lakeside View Homeowners Association. This is an authorized community project. The HOA approved a road extension at our last meeting. It's all in the minutes." I stared at her like she'd just claimed to own the moon. "I don't care what the HOA approved. This is private property. My private property. I'm not part of your HOA. I've got the deed and the boundaries to prove it." She gave a smile that said she'd already won. "I'm aware, but this access road has been on our long-term plan for years, and at the last meeting, the community voted to proceed. It was deemed necessary for traffic relief. We've had complaints for months about the bottleneck on Lakeview Drive. This new outlet connects directly to Maple Grove. So what?" I snapped. "You can't just vote to build on land you don't own." Karen tilted her head, like I was being unreasonable. "No one's trying to take your land. We're just improving traffic flow. It's for the good of the neighborhood, and the board has already allocated funds, so stopping the project now would be, well, complicated." "You have got to be joking." "I assure you I am not. Look, if you have a problem, I suggest you bring it up at the next HOA meeting. But for now, please don't interfere with contracted work." I took a deep breath. Let me say it again. I am not part of your HOA. I never signed anything. You have no authority here. "Then perhaps you should speak to legal," she said, pulling out her phone. "But I'd advise you not to interfere again. That can result in penalties." I laughed. I mean, What else could I do? Penalties? On me? For trying to stop someone from illegally building a road through my damn land? Karen didn't answer. She just took a few pictures of the site, and of me standing there in disbelief. Then climbed back into her SUV and drove off, kicking up a plume of dust in her wake. I stood there, alone, watching the backhoe sit like some metal insect in the middle of my property. The audacity was biblical. I called the sheriff's department. A deputy came out about an hour later, young guy, polite enough. He looked at my deed, scratched his head and said, "Well, sir, this sounds like a civil matter. If they're trespassing, you might need to take it to court. We can't arrest a backhoe." I didn't even smile at that. He gave me a card and left. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept running through it all in my head. The way Karen just brushed me off like a lawn gnome, the operator who never questioned where he was digging, the idea that someone else's meeting could result in a road cutting my land in half. I looked up everything I could: easements, property rights, nuisance claims. Nothing matched this insanity. Then, the next morning, I got mail. A letter. Fancy HOA stationery with their stupid logo. A leaf with waves under it. Inside was a notice of violation. Against me. According to the HOA, I was in breach of Community Development Compliance Policy by obstructing a pre-approved improvement project. Attached was a penalty invoice for $750. Due in 10 days. Signed by Karen Reeves. No joke. I stood on my porch, holding the letter, my dog Hank sniffing at my feet, and I remember saying aloud, "This is war." After that letter, I did what any rational, mildly furious man would do. I marched straight to the county recorder's office the next morning with my deed in one hand and a very bad attitude in the other. They confirmed what I already knew. No easements, no public access rights, no agreements, no shared use clause. My land was a self-contained, privately owned plot, entirely outside the jurisdiction of Lakeside View HOA. The clerk even printed me a fresh copy of the parcel map, with my boundaries highlighted in screaming yellow, like a highlighter of justice. Armed with that, I figured the next logical step was to talk to the HOA directly, clear the air, show them the documents, and maybe, just maybe, get them to stop before things escalated further. So I showed up uninvited to their open meeting, held in the community clubhouse, which felt less like a civic space and more like a smug suburban bunker with bad coffee and fake plants. I walked in just as Karen was wrapping up a monologue about community cohesion and long-term infrastructural vision. She froze the moment she saw me, her face tightening like she'd just tasted something sour. "Oh," she said. "Mr. Blake, we weren't expecting you." "Clearly," I replied, holding up my folder. "Thought I'd drop by and clarify a few things, since, you're building a road on land you don't own." The room went silent. A few HOA members glanced at each other like kids caught cheating on a group test. Karen, without missing a beat, gestured to an empty folding chair. "You're welcome to stay for the open portion. However, if this is about the Lakeview extension, I assure you, all approvals are in order." I didn't sit. Instead, I opened the folder and laid out my deed, property boundaries, and a letter from the county confirming no easement existed. Karen didn't even look. "The community voted," she said flatly. "On land that isn't yours." She clicked her tongue. "With respect, Mr. Blake, it's not unusual for HOAs to act preemptively when infrastructure benefits the majority. In fact, per Article 5 of our charter." "I'm not in your charter," I cut in. "I don't live in your subdivision. Your rules don't apply to me." Karen's expression didn't change, but her voice dropped half an octave. "Let me be very clear. The road is essential to traffic flow. The HOA acted in accordance with our internal processes, and the minutes reflect a supermajority vote. You may not appreciate the method, but the result is non-negotiable. The road is being built. Someone near the back, a skinny guy in a golf shirt and defeated eyes, cleared his throat. Did we ever get a signed easement? Karen shot him a glare that could have stripped paint. I turned to the man. No, you didn't, because I never signed anything. And I'll be damned if anyone's going to just roll pavement over my land because a bunch of lawn-obsessed strangers raised their hands in a room. Karen folded her hands. Then I suggest you consult legal counsel. I already have, and unless you halt construction immediately, my next call is to file an injunction. Karen leaned back in her chair, lips pursed. You do what you feel you must. The meeting adjourned shortly after, and I left before I punched something. But it didn't stop. The next day, 2 new workers arrived on my property. One held a clipboard. The other started marking the ground with orange spray paint, like they were prepping for a parking lot. I told them to leave. They told me they had permits. But when I asked to see them, they shrugged and said, "Talk to the board?" Then came the real kicker. One of the workers handed me a copy of the HOA meeting minutes Karen had mentioned. I scanned it. The document stated in vague bureaucratic sludge that adjacent property owner Evan Blake expressed no opposition to community development along southern boundary. I nearly choked. I had never spoken to them before the bulldozer arrived. That line was a lie, a complete fabrication. My name was spelled correctly. The signature line was blank, but the implication was clear. They were setting up a paper trail to justify the theft. I knew I couldn't fight this alone. I started researching land use attorneys and came across a name that kept popping up on forums, Julia Ramirez, a former HOA lawyer turned property rights defender. A few emails later, we had a meeting at a diner near the edge of town. She was in her early 40s, sharp eyes, blunt words, no tolerance for bullshit. My kind of person. After I showed her the letter, the false minutes, and the photos I'd taken of the roadwork, she didn't say much, just nodded, took notes, and finally said, "I used to represent HOAs like this one. I know their tricks, and I know Karen." "You know her?" "Oh yeah," Julia said. "She's infamous. Power-hungry, manipulative, and not above forging a few signatures if it gets her the vote. She got ousted from her last HOA for trying to annex a neighbor's pool. Literally. She leaned in. You've got a case, and I'm in." Later that night, I found a stack of flyers on my gate. They read, "Don't let selfish landowners disrupt our community. Support the Lakeview extension." My face, an unflattering photo of me mid-argument, was printed beneath the text. They were trying to paint me as the villain. Karen had declared war, but now I had allies, and evidence, and one hell of a pissed-off attorney. I was about a week into dealing with this mess when I got hit with the next wave. The road crews were back, but this time they brought backup. Clipboard guys in polos, 2 marked trucks with Lakeside View HOA Infrastructure Committee logos slapped on the side, and even a guy in a vest labeled Community Compliance Officer. Whatever the hell that meant. I had just returned from Julia's office, where we were finalizing the paperwork for the injunction, when I saw them unloading traffic cones and jackhammer equipment like they were prepping for a citywide construction project. Only this wasn't a city project. It was my goddamn property. I walked straight up to the guy holding the clipboard and asked as calmly as I could, "Who gave you permission to be here?" He didn't even look up. "All development approved by HOA board vote. Refer to the resolution from July 12th. "That resolution doesn't apply to private land," I said, already fishing for my phone. "You're trespassing," he shrugged. Take it up with the board. So I did. I called Karen's office. Yes, she had a self-appointed office in the community clubhouse. A smug voice answered, "Lakeside View HOA, this is Mrs. Reeves." "Karen, it's Evan. I'm looking at your goons tearing up my property again. You have about 60 seconds to call them off before I call the sheriff." Again. Her tone didn't even flinch. "As we informed you previously, the HOA has determined that the community interest supersedes individual obstruction. We've reviewed your claims, and the board maintains that the land in question falls under community improvement jurisdiction." Community improvement jurisdiction? What fantasy law book are you reading from? She sighed. "I'm sorry you feel that way, but your continued interference may result in escalating enforcement." Then she hung up. Escalating enforcement. Those two words stuck in my head like splinters. By the next morning, I understood what she meant. A certified letter showed up from Lakeside View Compliance Office, an absolute joke of a name, stating that I was now being fined for willful obstruction of approved civic development. The fine? $2,000. Due within 10 business days. Failure to pay, the letter claimed, could result in legal collections or a lien being placed against the property in question. I nearly threw it into the fire pit. Julia was furious when I showed her the letter. This is textbook HOA overreach. It's not just bluffing anymore. They're laying the groundwork for financial coercion. She's trying to choke you out with fake legal threats until you fold. And if I don't fold, Julia grinned, then we fight, and we make it public. But Karen wasn't just playing games with paperwork now. She was playing dirty. That same week, a drone buzzed my backyard while I was out working. Not a hobby drone either, one of those high-end surveillance types with a camera dome and stabilizers. It hovered above my shed for a few minutes, then zipped away. Later, I noticed a trail cam nailed to a tree that wasn't mine. It was pointed directly at my house. They were watching me. The next day, 2 HOA board members, both gray-haired, polo-clad, and reeking of suburban self-importance, knocked on my door. One of them, a guy named Ron something, handed me a printout of a violation compilation report. Apparently, I was now being cited for improper external structure maintenance. My paint was chipping. Unapproved signage. I'd put up a handwritten "No Trespassing" sign. Environmental disruption. For moving dead trees off my lot without proper review. I laughed in their faces. "You don't even have jurisdiction here," I said. "I'm not in your HOA." Ron gave me a practiced little smile. "There's been ongoing discussion that your parcel might fall under extended community overlay. We're still reviewing the boundaries." "You mean you're making them up?" They didn't respond, just turned and left, as if they'd done their civic duty for the day. A few nights later, I noticed lights on the far edge of my property. I grabbed a flashlight and walked out, expecting to find a deer or maybe teenagers screwing around. What I found instead was worse. Someone had dug shallow trenches and laid out plastic piping along the southern edge. A gas line. I followed the line and found a sealed valve marked LHOA Util, Expansion Phase 1. They were trying to install infrastructure under my land, without my consent. Julia lost her mind when I told her. "This is criminal," she said. "Unauthorized construction of gas lines is a major safety and legal violation. We're filing for an emergency injunction first thing tomorrow." But even as we prepped the documents, Karen kept her foot on the gas. She sent a letter to the county zoning board claiming I was operating an unpermitted construction site and requested a code inspection. Sure enough, 2 county officials showed up, clipboard in hand, asking why I had building materials stacked in the back and whether I had filed the correct forms for grading. It was a hit job, a coordinated campaign to bury me in legal and bureaucratic manure until I either cracked or sold. Julia told me to keep everything. Every letter, every voicemail, every printed flyer. And then, as if the universe had a sense of timing, I got a knock on the door from a quiet, middle-aged guy in jeans and a faded flannel. Said his name was Tom. Lived on Maple Grove. Soft-spoken, tired eyes, but he got right to the point. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said. "But I've been on the HOA board since it was formed. I don't like what she's doing. I don't like what we've become. And I have audio recordings." I blinked. Of what? Of meetings? Phone calls? Discussions that never made it into the official minutes? Karen strong-arming votes, threatening people, saying you were a temporary obstacle. You'll want to hear them. And I did. That night, I listened to Karen's voice through Tom's dusty little speakers say, verbatim, "If we can get the road laid fast enough, the courts won't be able to do anything. He'll be stuck. He's one man. We're the board." I didn't sleep much after that, but I knew exactly what we had to do next. I was sitting on my porch drinking gas station coffee and watching the morning dew steam off the grass when Julia called. I could hear the excitement in her voice before she even said the words. "Evan, check your email. Right now." I opened my phone, and there it was. A property auction notice from the county tax office. A neighboring parcel was up for bid. Not just any neighboring parcel either. It was a long, narrow strip that wrapped along the southern border of mine, and just so happened to include the exact stretch of unfinished pavement the HOA had clawed through my land. Someone owed back taxes, over 15 grand worth. The county had seized the land, and unless they paid up by the end of the week, it was going to auction. No minimum bid. I stared at the document like it had been sent by divine intervention. "How fast can we move?" I asked. "Already filed the paperwork," Julia replied. "You're registered as a bidder. You just need to show up and bring a check." The auction was held 3 days later in a drab multi-purpose room at the County Annex building. Maybe a dozen people there, most looking for abandoned farm lots or flip-worthy foreclosures. When Lot 17 came up, I stood up, heart thudding. The auctioneer rattled off the description. 1.8-acre parcel, zoned residential, access easement undefined, minor encroachment noted. That was their way of saying, someone's been building on this land and probably shouldn't be. "Do I hear $1,000? I raised my hand. Someone else bid $1,500. I raised to $2. No one countered. And just like that, with a signature and a certified check, I became the new legal owner of the land that held the rest of the HOA's illegal road. Their entire extension, driveway cuts, curbs, drainage, ran straight through it. By sundown, I had official documents in hand. Julia had already prepped a letter for me to send to the HOA and Karen personally. It was one sentence long. "As the legal owner of Parcel 134B and the right-of-way in question, I hereby revoke any and all permissions, implied or otherwise, for access or usage effective immediately." The next morning, I installed temporary barricades at both ends of the stretch. Bright orange. Hard to miss. Right in the middle of their shiny new Lakeview extension. I didn't block pedestrian traffic. Let the dog walkers and joggers do their thing. But cars? Not a chance. I figured that would buy me a few days of peace. I was wrong. Karen called me within the hour. "Evan, this is unacceptable. I own the land now. It's legally mine. You built a road across it without permission. That's the definition of trespassing. You've created a traffic hazard. People can't access their driveways. Sounds like an HOA problem. You're acting vindictively. Karen, I warned you. I begged you to stop. You didn't just ignore me. You lied, faked documents, and now you're surprised I played the game better than you? I'm taking this to court. Great. I'll see you there, with deeds, audio recordings, witness statements, and your own board member ready to testify against you. She hung up. By the end of the week, it was chaos. Residents of Lakeside View were trapped. The road had become their only vehicle access point, thanks to months of Karen's detours and infrastructure changes. Now it was cut off, legally. They couldn't reach their driveways without driving onto my land and over my barricades. I watched from my porch as cars lined up, then turned around, some honking in frustration. People started parking blocks away and walking to their homes like they were in a suburban siege. Then came the HOA emergency meeting, held in the clubhouse, but loud enough that I could hear half the shouting from down the street. Karen tried to spin it, blaming me, calling it an extortion attempt by a disgruntled landowner. But residents weren't buying it anymore. Someone finally asked the million-dollar question. Did we ever have permission to build this road? Karen refused to answer. Someone else brought up the auction. The lies unraveled faster than she could glue them back together. The next day, Julia delivered formal lease terms to the HOA. If they wanted vehicle access across my road, they'd have to pay rent. Monthly. Non-negotiable. $15,000 a month. Karen sent it back, unsigned. The day after that, one of the residents called me privately. Her name was Lana, said she'd been a supporter of the road project at first, but now she felt duped. Her husband needed dialysis, and the barricade made emergency access difficult. She asked if I could make an exception. I talked to Julia. Then we drafted a temporary solution. Medical access only, registered vehicles. We made exceptions where it counted. We weren't monsters. But Karen? She was another story. She responded by filing a cease and desist order claiming I was violating community right-of-way laws. A blatant bluff. But it bought her time to whip her board back into frenzy. So I responded the only way I could. I added, a steel gate at the main access point with an electronic lock. HOA had no code. That evening, a Tesla, driven by some board member, tried to tailgate another car through the pedestrian side. He clipped the post and took off a mirror. I reviewed the security footage, filed a police report, and billed the HOA for damages. They refused to pay, so I filed my own claim. We were past the point of polite warnings now. This was trench warfare in khakis and loafers. But this time, I was the one digging trenches. And I held the high ground. I wasn't surprised when the lawsuit landed on my porch. Thick envelope, official letterhead, full of smug legalese and righteous indignation. Lakeside View Homeowners Association visa Evan Blake. They accused me of malicious obstruction of public access, creating a traffic hazard, and my personal favorite, engaging in retaliatory conduct detrimental to the well-being of the community. I showed it to Julia. She laughed so hard she nearly spilled her coffee. "This is desperation," she said. "They're trying to flip the narrative, paint you as the aggressor, the bad neighbor. They built a damn road through my land." "Exactly. That's why we're countersuing, trespassing, property damage, harassment, fraud, and my personal favorite, document forgery." We filed the counterclaim within 24 hours. I wasn't playing defense anymore. Court proceedings began with the usual pretrial skirmishes, document requests, depositions, all the legal trench digging. But right out of the gate, We had the stronger position. Julia brought out the heavy artillery, survey maps, title history, drone footage of construction vehicles trespassing, and of course, the now infamous audio files from Tom. Karen's legal team did their best to delay, dodge, and deflect, but the facts weren't on their side, especially when Julia dropped the bomb. She added a motion for punitive damages, based on intentional deception and abuse of power. That got the judge's attention. Karen doubled down. She called an emergency HOA board meeting, and that's when everything really started to fracture. Tom, bless his rebel soul, leaked the agenda to Julia. Karen was planning to push a vote that would authorize HOA funds, community funds, to pay for a second round of legal defense. As in, they were going to burn homeowner dues trying to save her skin. But not everyone was on board. At the next public meeting, tempers exploded. Residents demanded accountability. Why are we paying to defend a woman who got us into this mess? Did you forge documents, Karen? Is any of this even legal? Karen deflected. She spun stories, cried about male aggression and land barons, and claimed I was bullying the board with litigation. But the walls were closing in. People were asking too many questions she couldn't answer. That same week, Julia received an anonymous email with scans of 3 HOA meeting minutes, one of which had my name typed in, claiming I'd voiced no objection to the road construction. The metadata on the PDF? Edited 2 weeks after Triched. The meeting date. That was all we needed. We amended the suit again. Now Karen wasn't just facing a civil countersuit. We forwarded the forged documents to the Potter County prosecutor. Julia made a strong case. This wasn't negligence. This was calculated. She lied to residents, falsified HOA records, used her position to push a personal agenda, and when challenged, she retaliated through fake violations and legal pressure. The prosecutor agreed to investigate. At the next hearing, Karen showed up pale and quiet, no longer flanked by her usual entourage. Her attorney argued that everything was a misunderstanding, that the board acted in good faith, and that Mr. Blake could have solved this amicably. That's when Julia stood up, holding a binder labeled Exhibits A through WRC. "Your Honor," she said, "we will demonstrate a pattern of misconduct, including fraud, harassment, illegal construction, and retaliatory enforcement, all orchestrated by Mrs. Reeves and abetted by a complicit HOA board." We called Tom as our first witness. He delivered. Calm, clear, devastating. He played the audio where Karen told the board, "If we build fast enough, the county won't reverse it. He'll be stuck. One man can't stop progress." The judge's eyes narrowed. Then came Lana, the resident whose husband needed dialysis. She testified that Karen had told her the road was already approved by the county and the landowner. Another lie. She looked shaken, like she was reliving a betrayal she never saw coming. The final blow came when Julia presented the forged minutes, showed the metadata timestamps, and revealed that Karen had manually typed in statements attributed to me weeks after the meetings. Under oath, she denied it. Then the prosecutor announced they were opening a formal criminal investigation into document fraud, conspiracy to defraud, and unlawful use of HOA funds. Karen froze. For the first time since this started, she looked scared. By that point, the court proceedings were being covered by local media. Headlines popped up. Homeowner sues HOA after road built through his land. President of HOA under investigation for fraud. Karen versus the street owner. Suburbia in revolt. The media attention worked in our favor. The public saw me not as the villain, but as the guy who had a road stolen and fought back. People started reaching out. Other homeowners from different HOAs sharing similar horror stories. We tapped into something deeper. Meanwhile, the HOA began to splinter. 2 board members resigned. Another went to the prosecutor with emails showing Karen pressured them into falsifying minutes. One even admitted that she'd threatened to fine them personally if they didn't vote her way. By the time our trial date was set, Karen's lawyer tried to negotiate a settlement. Julia looked at me. I looked at her. "No," I said. "We're going to court." She nodded. "Good, because I want this verdict to be public, on the record, permanent." The courtroom was packed, not just with lawyers and HOA board members, but residents, reporters, even a few HOA critics from other communities who showed up just to watch the fireworks. The judge, an older woman with silver hair and no tolerance for theatrics, called the session to order. It was time. Karen sat 2 tables over, dressed in a muted blue suit, her hands clasped tightly together, knuckles white. She didn't look at me, not once. Julia opened our case with the kind of calm ferocity that only comes from years of dealing with arrogant boards and paper tyrants. "This is not a simple civil dispute," she told the judge. "This is about one person weaponizing a system meant for neighborhood cooperation and turning it into a private tool for intimidation, coercion, and theft." Then came the evidence. We walked the court through the property boundaries, the timeline, the forged minutes, the fabricated violations, the drone footage, the unauthorized utility lines, the HOA fines, the complaint letters, the metadata showing late edits, the meeting audio, exhibit after exhibit. 26 of them. Karen's lawyer objected, tried to cast doubt on intentions, claimed it was all just a misunderstanding, and that Karen acted in the community's best interest. The judge shut it down. Relevance denied. Foundation shaky. Move along. Tom took the stand again, reaffirmed every statement, played the unedited audio of Karen instructing the board to create pressure points and keep the heat on Blake until he gives up. Then we brought in a surprise witness. Julia had quietly subpoenaed the construction company's foreman. He testified under oath that Karen assured him the land was HOA-owned and that permits had been cleared. When asked if he saw anything official from the county, he hesitated, then admitted, no. She said she'd handle it. Then came the financials. A forensic accountant went through HOA records. He confirmed that over $270,000 had been diverted from community funds to pay for the road, private legal fees, and administrative reimbursements to Karen's personal account. In plain English, embezzlement. The courtroom went dead silent when he said it. Karen tried to object, personally, stood up, spoke out of turn. Your Honor, this is a circus. These people are twisting everything. This man, she jabbed a finger at me, has manipulated the situation, bought up land to extort the HOA. He's not a victim. He's a predator. The judge slowly turned her head toward her. Mrs. Reeves, sit down. Speak again without my permission, and I'll hold you in contempt. Karen sat. The prosecutor stood next. She summarized the findings of the criminal investigation now fully underway. Document forgery, misuse of HOA funds, unauthorized construction, falsified municipal reports, and willful endangerment through unpermitted gas line installation. She formally announced that the state would be pressing criminal charges against Karen and 3 other board members. You could feel the room shift. Some residents gasped. One elderly man in the back let out a whispered, "Holy hell." Karen slumped in her chair. Her lawyer whispered frantically. But it was too late. We weren't in settlement territory anymore. We were in verdict territory. And when the verdict came down, it was glorious. The judge ruled that Karen Reeves was personally liable for forgery, fraudulent misrepresentation, and civil conspiracy. That the HOA board, as a governing body, was liable for trespass, harassment, and financial damages. That the road had been built illegally. And all construction on Evan Blake's property was to be removed or formally leased at fair market value with back pay. Then came the compensation. I was awarded $3 million. In damages, split between Karen personally and the HOA, an additional $15,000 per month. In lease payments for the road access, starting retroactively from the date of first use. A permanent injunction against any further HOA enforcement attempts on my property. And, cherry on top, court-mandated reimbursement of all legal fees, including Julia's, plus punitive damages for emotional distress. But the real kicker? Karen was remanded into custody, right then and there. The prosecutor requested immediate detention, citing risk of tampering with HOA records. The judge agreed. 2 bailiffs flanked her. She tried to protest, loudly. She called it a setup, shouted about abuse of power, and at one point actually screamed, "This is my neighborhood!" The judge didn't blink. You were elected to serve your neighbors, not to exploit them. You used your authority to harm a private citizen, commit fraud, and steal. You no longer represent this community. You represent the charges against you. The cuffs clicked. She was led out of the courtroom, screaming. Reporters chased the bailiffs down the hallway. Flash bulbs popped. Residents whispered. Some just stared. And I just sat there, hands folded, heart still, not smiling, not gloating, just relieved. Tom patted me on the shoulder. Julia nodded once, like a battlefield general surveying the ashes. It was over, and I'd won. 6 months after the verdict, I sat on my porch, coffee in hand, watching a delivery van pull up to the gate I installed where the HOA's illegal road once began. The gate now sported a freshly painted steel plaque. Private property. Trespassers will be leased. Yeah, that wasn't a typo. $15,000 a month? I figured I could afford a little humor. The driver punched in the code, one of the few who had it, and the gate creaked open with a satisfying hum. A truck followed behind, carrying gardening supplies. The new landscaping crew, hired by me, paid by the HOA. Another clause in the settlement. They had to fund restoration of the damage they'd done to my land during construction. Every inch of road they scarred, every pipe they buried. I made them pay to fix it, to my specifications. Julia called it therapeutic micromanagement. I called it justice with a shovel. The neighborhood had changed, too. Karen's old allies had all resigned. A court-appointed external manager now oversaw the HOA's operations. He drove a beat-up Jeep, wore untucked shirts, and clearly didn't care about fountain symmetry or mailbox fonts. Most of the residents avoided me at first, but over time, they warmed up. I wasn't the villain they'd been told about. Just a guy who refused to get steamrolled by a woman with a god complex and a clipboard. Lana even baked me a pie. I let her use the gate whenever she wanted. No code needed. Tom, meanwhile, had become a local folk hero. Someone painted a mural of him on the side of the clubhouse. The whistleblower of Oak Springs. He hated it. I loved it. As for Karen? Last I heard, she was 2 months into a 4-year sentence. Her request for house arrest denied on the grounds of demonstrated dishonesty. The court didn't want her within 100 feet of any community board, HOA, or even a neighborhood watch. Rumor had it she tried to run a book club in county jail and got shanked over a stolen bookmark. Okay, maybe that part wasn't true, but I like to think it could be. The best part, though, came one lazy Saturday afternoon. I was walking Hank past the edge of the gate when I saw a group of teenagers on bikes, paused, debating whether to go around the barricade. One of them looked like he was about to squeeze through when another kid stopped him. "Dude, no," he said. "That's the guy who sued the HOA. He owns the street." The first kid's eyes went wide. "No way." The second kid nodded. "Yeah, don't mess with him. He'll probably fine you." I smiled and kept walking. Hank barked once like punctuation. When we got back to the porch, I poured another cup of coffee and looked down the road, my road. The same one they tried to take, the one I now leased back to them for more than my uncle's entire estate was worth. Funny thing about people like Karen, they think ownership is about control, about rules and signatures and who yells the loudest in a meeting. But real ownership? It's quiet. It doesn't need to shout. It's a deed in a drawer and a gate that only opens when you say so. And mine? It stays closed.
This isn't just a story of trespassing. It's a masterclass in how unchecked authority, once wrapped in the pleasant packaging of community improvement, can morph into full-blown systemic abuse. From the very beginning, the HOA, led by Karen Reeves, operated under one chilling assumption, that the ends, a road, justified any means, lies, forged minutes, and fake violations. But how often do we, as homeowners, simply trust the language of community good without asking, good for whom, and at what cost? Evan Blake, the protagonist, finds himself blindsided by a bulldozer, literally. He did everything right, inherited land legally, confirmed boundaries, opted out of HOA jurisdiction. Yet in the face of collective will and bureaucratic manipulation, those facts became an inconvenience. One the HOA tried to bulldoze, both figuratively and physically. Would you have known to go to the recorder's office? Would you have had the presence of mind to document everything while under siege? And more importantly, how do you fight a group that fabricates authority faster than you can call the sheriff? The HOA's tactics escalated from nuisance fines to misinformation, public shaming, and even unauthorized infrastructure installation. And when that didn't work, they tried character assassination. But what broke their campaign wasn't louder shouting. It was evidence, allies, and a lawyer who knew exactly where HOAs hide their skeletons. What truly elevates this story is the odd turning point. When Evan buys the very land the HOA built their illegal road through. It's poetic justice, not because it's flashy, but because it's precise, lawful, and absolute. Karen's fatal mistake? Underestimating the one thing no forged minutes can defeat. Real ownership, backed by real law and a man unwilling to be silenced. Real power is quiet. It's a deed in your hand, a gate that only opens by your permission, and the knowledge that no amount of HOA theatrics can overwrite what is legally and rightfully yours.